Hello, good evening. Welcome to St. Peter's in Hove. I'm Father Alexander. I got a rather severe toothache, but nevertheless I'm managing to speak. I hope. The third chapter of the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, is justly famous. This is the call of Samuel. You remember the little boy is asleep in the temple and he hears a voice calling Samuel, Samuel. And three times he gets up and he goes to Eli saying, "What you called, here I am." And of course, eventually Eli realizes that he hasn't called Samuel, that it's God who's calling Samuel. And he says to him, next time the voice calls, say, "Here I am, Lord. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." This is the passage that's read out in churches, the beginning of chapter 3 until to verse 11. And then it breaks off. What happens is Samuel says, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Then the Lord said to Samuel, ... We're not told when it's read out in church what exactly it is the Lord says to Samuel. Okay, that episode, that beautiful episode, is framed by two other episodes. The first in which a man of God came to Eli and warned him about the disaster about to overtake his family. That's chapter 2, verses 27 to the end of the chapter. And then what God says is going to happen to Eli and his family. Now, Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, are very bad priests. They're going to be destroyed. The prophet has said not only are they going to be destroyed, but the family of Eli is essentially going to be demoted from being the priests, and it'll go to another branch of the priesthood, another descendant of Levi. It'll go to, it turns out, Zadok. But Eli's family are finished, despite the fact that God had promised them that they would be his servants forever. No, Eli's family is finished because of Hophni and Phinehas' wrongdoing. Then, of course, when God says to Samuel, he says, "I'll carry out," he then again prophesies, God in person says he's going to destroy Hophni and Phinehas, and no sacrifice or offering will ever expiate the guilt of Eli's family. In other words, Eli's family is going to be cursed forever. And he says, "I'm going to do something in Israel which will make the ears of all who hear it ring," says God. "I shall carry out that day against Eli everything that I've said about his family from beginning to end." So Eli is going to be punished and his sons are going to be punished. Now, we generally regard Eli as a rather sympathetic character, a nice old man who's been so good to the boy Samuel. And this is his reward. Samuel is the one who then has to tell Eli that his family is going to be punished by the Lord. Samuel lay where he was until morning, this is verse 15, then opened the doors of Yahweh's temple. That was his job. Samuel was afraid to tell Eli about the vision, but Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." "Here I am," he replied. Eli asked, "What message did he give you? Please do not hide it from me. May God bring unnamables on you and worse ones too if you hide anything of what he said to you." Samuel then told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Eli said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what he thinks good." So Eli is, and this I think is part of the story that is often glossed over or ignored or not realized. Eli is a tragic figure. First of all, he's a bad father. He's got two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and they've run wild. Eli has been unable to discipline them. He's tried to discipline them because he's rebuked them and they've ignored him. Then Eli has Samuel, who's such a good boy, as his sort of adopted grandson. And Samuel is the one who brings him the bad news that his family is being thrown over, is being exiled from the favor of the Lord, and that his two sons are going to be killed. And Eli, of course, takes this in good stead. He takes this with resignation. He is the Lord. Let him do what he thinks best. There's something tragic in that. Incidentally, when Samuel hears the voice of the Lord, he goes to Eli, and Eli says, "Go, Dad, go and sleep. Go back to sleep. I didn't call you." Only the third time does Eli realize that the Lord is calling the boy. So, in other words, Eli, for a priest, has got a very poor knowledge of the Lord. And it says, in those days it was rare for the Lord to speak. Visions were uncommon. Eli's never had a vision. The Lord has never spoken to him. Rather, the Lord has spoken to this child. And it takes some time for Eli to realize that the Lord is speaking to this child. So Eli's a bad father, he's also a bad priest. He's a nice man. He's kind to Samuel, but he's a bad priest. I think Eli represents the decay of the priesthood. Now, one of the things we'll find in the first book of Samuel and the second book of Samuel is an anti-monarchical thread running through the books. In other words, the theme that kings are bad for you, that the kings oppress you, that the kings are not really in accord with God's law, that the king is something you want because of your human folly, and the king will punish you. But there's also an anti-priestly thread. The priest that you have, who's inherited his position through being descended from Levi, is not a good priest, and that God will raise up for himself a good priest. Now, if we go back to chapter 2 at the end, it says this, the days are coming when I shall cut off your strength and the strength of your father's family, so no one in your family will live to old age, etc. Then he's going to get rid of Hophni and Phinehas. They're both going to die on the same day. I shall raise myself a faithful priest who will do as I intend and as I desire. I shall build him an enduring house, that's the Temple of Solomon, and he will walk in the presence of my anointed forever. Now, my anointed must mean the king, must mean Solomon. This is a prophecy. But forever, so in other words, what God is talking about here is what the prophet is talking about, is the eternal high priest. The members of your house who will survive will come and beg him on their knees for a silver coin and a loaf of bread and say, please give me some priestly work so I can have a scrap of bread to eat. In other words, the priesthood of Levi is going to be set aside, and somebody who is going to be the eternal high priest is going to replace the priesthood of Levi. So what do we see here? What we see here is something very strange. We see a discontent with what goes on in Shiloh. We see a discontent with the priesthood. And really what we see is a discontent with the liturgy, with the sacrifices. Hophni and Phinehas have not been doing the sacrifices properly. The sacrifices have failed to do what they're supposed to do. That is to say, unite the people with God. Be fitting worship for God. In other words, there's a sense that the worship offered to God at Shiloh is not good enough. So we need a better temple, which will be the Temple of Solomon. And we need a better priest, who will be the eternal high priest. Now, whether this eternal high priest is Abiathar or Zadok or the priest at the time of Solomon is presumably is what the people who originally read this would have thought. But naturally, we see the eternal high priest as Jesus Christ. Our worship offered on this earth is imperfect worship. And it should fill us with discontent, and we should long for perfect worship. And of course, the perfect worship we have is the Mass, because that is the sacrifice offered not by human beings, but by Jesus Christ himself. The other thing is God doesn't speak to the priests. He doesn't speak to the people we think of as our representatives before God. He speaks to the child Samuel. In other words, let the little children come to me. God has chosen as his interlocutor somebody who is young, innocent, and uncorrupted, and somebody who is standing outside the hierarchical structures. Hophni and Phinehas and Eli, these are the hierarchy. These are the people who rule through the power of inheritance. Samuel is not in a priestly family. Samuel's not a priest. He opens the door of the temples. He is the little boy who does the menial jobs. And he's also a little boy. Obviously, he's been educated and so on. I mean, how old is he at this time? 8, 9, something like that. So God will surprise us, and does surprise us, by choosing that which we ourselves do not expect him to choose. So this famous story, Samuel 3, do read it again, has got a lot more depth to it than the version we usually hear, which is shorn of its context. Context really is all. All the very best. See you again soon. Bye.